Okay, so here we go. So take two, starting technical difficulties. But the reason I wanted to do this, that like I said earlier, talking to my dad about James Bond, a pop culture figure who's been in a majority of your life and my whole life, and I thought it'd be fun to talk to you about just different questions regarding James Bond, and yeah, throw it on YouTube, see if we can get 10 views. That's the goal. So the first question that I had was the first James Bond movie, and you were about to tell an awesome story about how your first exposure to James Bond was through the Mad magazine, huh?
Yeah, great. I've had James Bond. The books were written actually before I was born. I was born in 1953, and I think at that time, Ian Fleming had written a number of James Bond books, but none of the movies had been released yet. My first exposure to James Bond, the entity. I was a child of maybe right now I'm very close to 70. I'm not far away from 70, and I saw it probably when I was around 10 or 12 years old, and I was a very avid comic book reader, as many children are, kids are at that time, at that age, and I was looking at Mad Magazine, which I believe is still in publication. And Mad Magazine had a parody of the From Russia with Love movie, so which was actually the second movie. Up until that time, I had no awareness of James Bond at all. I wasn't reading books. I read comic books. And so I saw these pictures, which were actually photographs taken from the movie with verbal captions around them saying James Bond would be saying something. And Mad Magazine is a comic, comedic, similar to National Lampoon, and it'd just be saying silly things. And anyhow, I saw it and I thought, boy, that's interesting. This James Bond character. Up until that time, about the only movies that I recall, they were either horror movies or war movies or westerns, and then dramas, and kids typically don't care much about dramas. But I wasn't really aware of spy movies. I thought, I'm not quite sure what this is all about, but it looked pretty cool. So as fate would have it, at that time and at that age, there were no DVDs, no streaming services. You would see a movie at a movie theater when it was released, and it would be at the movie theater for several weeks, and then it would go from the movie theater, and that was it. You didn't have any way of seeing it until, maybe a year later, 2 years later, it would show up at a drive-in movie theater. If you're lucky, it might show up on TV a year or 2 years later on NBC, CBS, CBC, public broadcasting network. But otherwise, you wouldn't be able to see it. It's not like we have today where you can stream it and watch it as many times as you like. You can watch the entire library of James Bond movies at your whim. Wasn't able to do that back then. So, as luck would have it, I saw this James Bond in Mad Magazine, and they were having, the movie theater folks, were having a double feature of James Bond, Dr. No, which I had no awareness of at all, and From Russia with Love, which was mentioned in that Mad Magazine article. And so I thought, I want to see this. So I went to see it. The very first movie I saw was Dr. No, which was the first James Bond movie. It wasn't the first James Bond book. The first book was Casino Royale, but the first movie was Dr. No. And so I saw Dr. No and From Russia with Love. And I was absolutely astonished. This was, again, so different from anything I'd ever seen. Cowboy movies or monster movies or war movies. This was a single guy kind of saving the world from disaster. Sean Connery was, just the man's man. And I was a kid, so I really didn't have I didn't necessarily associate with grown-up men. They were, actors. But this guy was cool. I mean, he had a license to kill. He killed with, it didn't seem to bother him to kill. The first time I saw him killing someone in Doctor No, I guess was Professor Dent, that came to this little hotel room where James Bond was staying, and James Bond had assembled some pillows in the bed and covered it up to look like he was laying in bed, and Professor Dent came in with a gun and shot the pillows, and James Bond was sitting there drinking vodka, probably waiting for him. And after Professor Dent shot all the bullets into the pillows, James Bond shut the door, surprised Professor Dent, and after talking to him for a few minutes, he just calmly shot him, killed him in cold blood, and it never fazed him. And I was astonished by this because it was something he didn't see at that time. That was pretty graphic. And often in a cowboy movie, when a cowboy would shoot the bad guy, you would see a picture of the cowboy shooting his gun and smoke coming, but you wouldn't see the bad guy being hit by a bullet. In this James Bond movie, you saw right there James Bond shooting this guy, and the guy drops, and James Bond, and the guy's laying probably pretty much dead on the floor, and James Bond shoots him again because, well, I got another bullet, might as well use it. And it was astonishing. And Dr. No, the villain, whatever the actor's name was, Weissman. He was supposedly an Asian American guy that was basically a mad scientist, and it was different. It was a different kind of villain. I'd never seen anything quite like that. It certainly wasn't a cowboy villain. Mm-hmm. And I also was astounded with Ursula Andress, as she's the first Bond girl, and your first view of her is she's coming up out of the ocean in a bikini, a white bikini, and she's carrying conchs or whatever they're called, a shell. Mm-hmm. And
with a knife.
With a knife. You know what? I don't remember the knife. I just remember her white bikini, and she was so striking. She was an incredible figure, and she stuck with me as probably one of the premier Bond girls. Sean Connery was the first Bond I saw, and as cool as he was in Dr. No, I really think I liked him better in From Russia with Love. Dr. No seemed there wasn't a lot of set variation. It was basically him on Dr. Snow Island. My understanding, and I haven't really studied the numbers, so I could be incorrect, but in terms of the movie budget, Dr. No was relatively low budget. There wasn't a lot going on. The only weapons Bond had was his Beretta, Walther PPK. He had a Beretta at the beginning of the movie, and it was switched out for his Walther PPK. So he had his pistol, and that's kind of it. He didn't have any of the other gadgets that he would have in subsequent movies. So it was very low budget. No elaborate sets. They had the control room where Dr. No operated, and they had Dr. No's living quarters, which had this elaborate fish tank in it, or viewing wall, which Dr. No said cost $1 million. But no elaborate sets that you would see in subsequent Bond movies. So it was sort of low budget, but it was the first one, and so that was your introduction to James Bond, and it was so cool. What I liked, what really got me hooked on James Bond was From Russia with Love, which would take James Bond quite a bit further than what he had been in Dr. No, and it was just the glimpse of what's to come. You could see how the directors and the executive producers were seeing where could we take this. From Russia with Love had a much larger budget. It started using the different locales from Russia and Istanbul, these glamorous remote foreign locations, not necessarily remote, but foreign locations that were quite glamorous, where Bond would go to them, and he was pretty much at home wherever he was at. He was in command, and that was so cool. The way Sean Connery portrayed the figure.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool. Like, that kind of touches on the Bond lifestyle that fans like to talk about, where he knows multiple languages. He seems comfortable wherever he goes. He knows what kind of drink he's gonna get, and wherever he's at in Cuba, gonna get a mojito, and so on. So in the same night you saw Dr. No and From Russia with Love back to back?
Yep, that was my first viewing. Dr. No, and I actually, prior to seeing Dr. No, I didn't even know it existed.
Mm-hmm.
All I knew was from Mad Magazine, and the photos in Mad Magazine were all from Russia with Love.
Right.
So I didn't even, other than the movie theater saying James Bond in both Dr. No and From Russia with Love, I had no idea what Dr. No was about.
Right. Cool. This is a little side note, something I wanted to ask you about. I don't know if you were lying to me when I was a kid or if there's some truth to it, but you said that
I only lied to you about Santa Claus.
You said that your dad would go to work and he would drop you off at the movie theater. Yeah. And then this is the part where I don't know if you were telling the truth, but you said he only had so much money to give you, so you would hide underneath the movie theater seats while they cleaned up the theater until the next movie started. Then you'd crawl out from underneath the seats and continue watching James Bond all day long, several times.
Well, I don't know that I lied. It absolutely is true. And actually, that only happened one time. It was with Thunderball. And it wasn't too much longer. To give sort of a chronological idea of what's going on, the first two I saw was Dr. No From Russia with Love. And because they were a double feature, that means they had been released. Mm-hmm. So they had been released for a while and they were being brought back. It's kind of surprising it was at a movie theater, because typically a double feature like that would be shown at a drive-in theater. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, and at the time I didn't know, had no awareness, is that was probably around the time that Goldfinger had already been released. Mm-hmm. So my guess is 1963, and 1963 I would have been 10 years old. So that kind of puts things into perspective. So, and I'm guessing 63, but it'd be, in that area, 63, 65. If it's 65, I would have been 12 years old. So the first Bond film I saw on its release was Thunderball.
That's cool.
So the chronological order of the movies was Dr. No, then From Russia with Love. I saw them as a double feature. I hadn't seen Goldfinger yet, and in honesty, I'm not really sure when I saw Goldfinger. I mean, I know I've seen it a gazillion times, but I don't know when I saw it. But the first movie that I recall seeing my father taking me in and dropping me off, he worked at a steel mill. And it's true, he would take me in the beginning of when the first showing, he would take me in as he's going to work, and then he'd be at work for 8 hours. So I've kind of stranded. Now, it's true, I saw Thunderball, I don't know,
4 times in one day.
4 times. I sat through it, and man, I knew Thunderball. I don't really recall hiding under the seats, but I know that, between the showings, the theater, everyone would clear out, and I don't recall hiding, but I just sat in the seats.
Waiting for it to start again.
Yeah, waiting for it to start again, and I wasn't thrown out. And maybe it's because I was only 12 years old. I was just a kid sitting there. So maybe the folks coming in would clean up, popcorn boxes and all the crap left by the audience that had left. I would be pretty much the only one in there, and they wouldn't throw me out. I don't recall hiding under a seat, but I didn't pay again. Mm-hmm. I saw it 4 times, Thunderball, and I don't recall doing that for
You only
for
live twice.
Goldfinger.
Oh.
So, and just thinking back at the times, we didn't have the ability to buy the movie. We didn't have videotape. We didn't have DVDs. So my guess is I would have seen Goldfinger like at a drive-in theater or maybe another double feature, something like that, because it just was hard to see stuff, when you wanted to. The next movie after Thunderball was You Only Live Twice, and my father did the same thing with me, left me there, and I saw You Only Live Twice a whole crap load of times, like 4 times, and so much so I remember I had memorized it. I knew I could tell you the entire movie. I couldn't necessarily tell you all the lines that were said, but my God, I knew every scene in the movie.
Yeah, you knew what set piece was coming up.
Yeah, Molly, my God, I'd seen it. And by the time I saw it the 4th time, I was kind of like, I got it. I know what's in this movie. I don't need to see it the 4th time.
Yeah. If you had to take a guess how much movie ticket was back then.
Oh, probably $7.
$7.
If even that, it wouldn't have been very much.
I gotcha.
And when I saw it, I would guess it was on a weekend, so it was probably like a matinee. It had matinee pricing, which would have been cheaper. And I was a kid, so as a child, they give you discounts too. So I say $7. I don't know. Maybe it's $3.
Yeah.
Way back then.
I was gonna say I would have thought it would have been a lot cheaper than today, but I mean, yeah, you can get a movie ticket today for a matinee like $7-8. So,
and well, it's probably if so, they wouldn't have been $7 then. I mean, back then, gasoline was 29 cents a gallon. It's a tenth of what it is now. So if a movie ticket is $7 now, maybe it was a buck. It wasn't very expensive, so it wasn't so much the money; it was the time.
Yeah. I got you. Cool. Well, jumping into me, I kind of need your help trying to remember mine, because it's like I said, James Bond's just always been a part of my life. So I actually don't remember seeing James Bond for the first time. Kind of like you were mentioning, when you were growing up, you didn't have VHS, DVD, Laserdisc, when you were younger. That didn't obviously come until later. So I guess when I was younger, we had VHS. You of course had the Laserdiscs, but VHS primarily was like my main media. And I don't remember having all the James Bonds on VHS or not, but I guess just as far as a time frame, I was born in 91, so what that puts me between License to Kill before I was born, and then GoldenEye in 96. So if I'm assuming you saw GoldenEye in movie theaters, and that, I guess I would have been 5. I'm assuming I would have went to that, but I don't remember that. Do you remember taking me to see GoldenEye by any chance?
I would say a couple things. When I was always a sort of a techno geek, and so when videotape came out, and VHS and Betamax, I had them both. And although initially not the entire James Bond library was available, they certainly had some available. And whatever was available, as it became available, I would have bought it. So I am sure that, reasonably sure, that by the time you were 5 years old, you would have seen some James Bond on videotape. And I would say at that time, there was probably enough time for them to have all the James Bond tapes out up until GoldenEye. There was quite a gap between the last Roger Moore movie and GoldenEye. I'm sorry,
Timothy Dalton.
Timothy Dalton. I don't know what sort of gap there was between Dalton and GoldenEye.
I'm taking a guess, but if I were to guess, I'd say License to Kill was 89, and then GoldenEye 96.
That's a big gap. I mean, to give you an idea of the gap, in the heyday when James Bond was super popular, and part of the reasons why the sets were not as elaborate as they are in some of today's versions, is they were coming out like every year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at the end of the Bond movie, it'd say James Bond would be back, and they often would even identify the title of the next movie.
Right.
So at the end of Goldfinger, it would say James Bond will return in Thunderball,
That's cool.
and that it would be like a year. It certainly would be no more than two years later, but very often they were annual events, and they were just popping out. I mean, just like the Beatles were putting out albums every year, bam, 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 bam. Now you can see some pretty, and it's interesting because because of the quick sequence, Sean Connery wasn't aging as much.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of looked pretty much the same between Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball. He didn't seem to be that much different in age. Now, when you look at today, for example,
Daniel Craig and
Thank you, Daniel
the
Craig.
gaps in his.
When you look at the difference between how he looks in Casino Royale
Mm-hmm.
and how he looks in his latest, he's really aged. But in actuality, it's been quite a long time.
Yeah,
I mean,
over 10
10
years.
years.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at Sean Connery in his last outing, and one might argue which one that is. Well, in the Eon Everything or Nothing productions, his last outing was Diamonds Are Forever. He kind of looked old. He put on weight. He looked nothing like he did in his very first movie.
Mm-hmm.
So he aged. And one could argue that his last outing as James Bond was in Never Say Never Again, which was not part of the Eon movies, but it was filmed. So it came out when the Bond movie, I don't know, The Spy Who Loved Me or something, what Roger Moore was playing. But Connery was older, and gee whiz, you look at Sean Connery in his later movies with Indiana Jones. He has a beard. He doesn't look a lot like James Bond.
Yeah, what's kind of crazy is I almost look at young Connery and old Connery as two different people in a way. Like what's the movie with Catherine Zeta-Jones, Entrapment?
Yeah.
And then what the Hunt for Red October, where those are like older Connery movies.
Yeah.
I don't really look at him as, man, that's Sean Connery, but he's old.
Yeah.
I kind of look at it as
He's
like
a different actor.
yeah, almost yeah.
Because when I see it, like you said, The Hunt for Red October, he performs his role very well, but I never think in terms of, that's James Bond.
Yeah,
It doesn't remind me of James Bond at all.
right.
So it's kind of interesting. But part of that allure to Connery was the rapid succession between the movies, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice. They were coming out like a year and a half apart, and just bam, 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 bam. And that's one of the reasons Sean Connery lost enthusiasm for the role. He said, it's just like, my God, I don't get a breather. I'm just constantly, I'm either filming or I'm promoting or learning. He said it just never stops, and it's like a killer.
Right.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah.
I guess.
So I agree with what you're saying. It's unfortunate I don't remember the first Bond movie, but I agree with what you're saying. Where I'm assuming I had to have seen something prior to GoldenEye.
So in terms of GoldenEye, would you have been with me at the movie? I'd say almost certainly yes, because one, I don't remember any movie I went to that I didn't take you to. You were the family. You were part of the family, and we'd go see every movie, and so I would say that GoldenEye was probably the first James Bond movie you saw in a theater, and I would say you and I and Mom saw it together, almost certainly. I'm not sure if it was in the United States or in the United Kingdom.
That would have been U.S. Probably.
In '95, we would have been back in the United States.
Yeah. So what, Louisiana at that point, perhaps.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up, and we're just gonna touch on video games slightly. When I think of GoldenEye, like most younger fans of Bond, I connect with the video games quite a bit. And I would say, I've played a whole bunch of James Bond video games, and I think my favorites are probably the Pierce Brosnan era. So just to name a few: GoldenEye, Everything or Nothing, and Nightfire. Those are probably some of my favorite, and they're all based on Pierce Brosnan's portrayal. But when I think of GoldenEye, and GoldenEye honestly is probably my second favorite Bond movie. We'll talk about favorite Bond movie here in a bit, but GoldenEye is probably my second favorite. But so much of that has to do with the Nintendo 64 game, which is probably one of my favorite James Bond games as well. And I think that goes for a lot of people. That game really set the stage for first-person shooters, and it's just an awesome game. And I was playing it recently. But I guess the reason I bring that up is I remember you getting me a Nintendo 64 that was in Louisiana, and I saw the GoldenEye video game, and I was like, oh, I had no idea about it. That was before I'm on the internet every day like today, just seeing I know what's coming 3 years from now. I know what's in development, and that was just like, boom, there it is in front of me, ready to go. Like, oh, it's GoldenEye. And then I think Pierce Brosnan just sticks with me because that was kind of the Bond that I grew up with. So his movies really stick with me. I remember one time you had friends over, you and Mom had friends over, and we watched Tomorrow Never Dies. And I'm sure it was so annoying, but what I did was I acted out the entire movie. So while you guys are sitting there watching Tomorrow Never Dies on the projector, I'm like going underneath the projector. So the motorcycle scene, or what's her name, Wei Ling, where Wei Ling's on, which I watched that recently, like a few days ago. I watched Tomorrow Never Dies. That, what they did, I'm going to go ahead and say it, would be impossible because I guess Pierce had the throttle and they were handcuffed, him and Wei Ling. So Wei Ling would, I guess it was like, I'm trying to think, she was flipping back and forth between sitting in front of him and sitting behind him. But what I know is since they were handcuffed, he couldn't use his other hand. So she had to do the clutch. So for them to be in sync where he's, like pull, you pulling the clutch while I shift, like that would be an absolute nightmare to do. But anyway, during that scene while you were watching it with friends, I was just running in circles, pretending I was on a motorcycle, going underneath the projector, behind the couch, underneath the projector, on the couch. And I'm sure y'all were just thinking, man, sit down so we can watch this movie.
Well, all I can say is I don't recall that. If it had been super annoying, I'd remember it. I don't remember it at all. So it mustn't have been, I probably thought it was funny.
Yeah. Well, who knows what they thought, but
there's an interesting thing about Pierce Brosnan in his portrayal of James Bond. I am a huge fan of Sean Connery.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with him, and I really like Pierce Brosnan. Amazingly, I don't have much of recognition of Roger Moore at all.
Mm-hmm.
And Roger Moore made a ton of James Bond movies.
To this day, he still made the most, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I can.
He made the most. I don't know, 8, 9. He made a lot.
Right.
And he probably made at least one more than he should have. But, it's quite an age difference from his first to his last. But I was never impressed with his portrayal of James Bond.
Yeah, that's a shame because when I hear other actors and producers, directors talk about him, they and I agree with what they say, but they said he was a great ambassador for the James Bond franchise because he's not getting caught with girls or drugs or anything, and I think he was a good ambassador. But yeah, it's unfortunate that when you go for a James Bond movie, whatever you're looking for, whether that's like violence, like with Daniel Craig, or just looking cool, like Pierce Brosnan, or just being original, like Connery. It's like, what do you go to Roger for? Because he's more of the lover, not a fighter. type of guy. And he had cool gadgets, cool cars, Moonraker. Like, he had cool stuff, but I don't really gravitate towards his movies.
And you're right. And each one of those actors, and it's funny because we don't, as much as I don't really think about Roger Moore, he was an ambassador. I think is a great definition because he wasn't a very physical James Bond.
Mm-hmm.
He relied on these goofy gadgets. My watch does this, and my ring does this, and all this horse shit. But Brosnan is certainly more physical than Roger Moore was.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one scene where Brosnan picked up a big glass ashtray and conked someone on the head with it. I mean, and his scene where he's in a place where they're selling military weapons, airplanes, and all this shit, and his racing through there to get out and flying the jet out, and his scene in GoldenEye, where he's racing through this Russian place fighting. I mean, he's very physical, and I think I would go so far to say he's more physical than Sean Connery was, but he's not as physical as Daniel Craig. I think in terms of who's the most physical James Bond, I think Daniel Craig is hands down. The shit that he does, and it wasn't so much in his last movie, but my God, in his first few movies. He was like a madman, running around, running through walls and just beating at. I mean, my God, when he would fight people, it was like if you had him standing beside the enemy, you'd say after the fight, who won? Because they both had the shit beat out.
Yeah.
It looks like Daniel Craig's ears almost tore the hell off. And bitten. Great physicality, and I think they took that from the Bourne movies. They're just so physically violent, and I think it was a great evolution from the not so physical stuff. Certainly Roger Moore, it almost became campy. It almost became a Batman series of just it was a parody of itself, which I love James Bond, but I like the grittier versions that Daniel Craig had and Pierce Brosnan portrayed, as well as Sean Connery.
So I agree with all that, but just so we don't crap on Roger too much, just give me like one scene where you're like, man, Roger was pretty cool in that scene, right? Like, one, and just to kind of while you're thinking, just to give you one scene, something that a lot of fans point out is, and I have no idea which movie it is, but apparently there's a scene where there's a guy in a car and Roger basically gets about to fall off the mountain, and Roger kicks the car, kicks him to his death.
I know the scene. I get a little confused by the movie. I think it and the guy that he kicks is an assassin, and they use this little white dove on a pin, and they have it in their lapel. And the movie, I believe, is the one that has the Greek girl that uses the crossbow, and that's the one they have that little yellow car in, and they're driving through I think it's pistachio nut trees, but I could be mistaken on the kind of trees and the thing. It's just a silly little car, and I want to say it's. I don't know. I forgot the name of the movie.
It's a shame. I feel like I'm not a good Bond fan because I don't know that off the top of my head. I'd say I've seen all the James Bond movies, but I've unfortunately probably seen Rogers the fewest amount of times.
He just Roger Moore. There's just some things he's done. I could name things that piss me off about Roger Moore more than things that I think are great. That movie where he was the clown running around. Dressed as a clown, it was just stupid. I didn't like it at all. I thought it was dopey as hell. And Roger Moore's a great actor. When he was the Saint, he did a wonderful job. But maybe you blame the producers and the
Saint. So that's not the movie with Val Kilmer, is it?
Val Kilmer.
Val Kilmer was Batman and Batman Forever, and he did. I'm pretty sure he did a movie called The Saint. I hope I'm not mixing it.
Oh! I thought you meant in a James Bond movie, and I thought Val Kilmer. I don't recall him ever being. But yeah, he did The Saint. But the movie that Val Kilmer did as The Saint was drawn from a television series that Roger Moore did, and it was The Saint.
Actually, I didn't know that. That's
and it
awesome.
was a long time ago, and it actually was pretty cool.
Cool.
You know, it was actually pretty cool. It was almost like Pierce Brosnan series, Remington Steele, that he was in. He actually would have been in a James Bond movie, but there was a conflict with him in Remington Steele that he couldn't get out of the contract, and so he just said, well, you know, I'm a little bit young to be James Bond. Let's give it a few more years.
Cool.
But Roger Moore, I like that one scene. That was I think the movie's called For Your Eyes Only, I think. I'm not certain, but it's certainly in that area, which I thought For Your Eyes Only, and that was sung by Sheena Easton. I kind of thought that was among the better that Roger Moore portrayed. There's a lot of them are kind of tied for the shittiest. You know, Octopus, I didn't like it. The very first movie that Roger Moore was in, Live and Let Die, I thought was okay.
Cool song.
Great song, Paul McCartney. But you know, Roger Moore, the movies when they had Jaws running around again. You can't blame that on Roger Moore. That's more the producers and the directors. It was just getting campy. With Jaws and that goofy ass sheriff they had in 2 movies from Louisiana. Woo-wee boy,
Yeah,
that's just dopey stuff. And
yeah, I agree. So I agree. So I looked it up real quick. Where he kicked the car was For Your Eyes Only. So good job on that. So I will say again, I'm trying. It's unfortunate for Roger, but what I'm trying to do is pull the positives out. So I'm just going to throw out a few positives, and then we'll move on. What's the white car that goes underwater?
That's a cool car. It's a Lotus Esprit.
Yeah, and that's a cool scene, and that's cool.
It's a very cool scene, but I don't attribute that to Roger Moore.
Yeah, true. I will say, in Live and Let Die, his outfit, what is it, a black turtleneck with the brown holster? He looks pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a cool outfit.
Yeah, and the last thing, and unfortunately, again, it doesn't have much to do with Roger, but in A View to a Kill, the final one, I forget the bad guy's name, but when he's the milkman and he goes to that building, he's throwing these milk bombs. That was a cool scene. And unfortunately, Roger wasn't even there for that scene. It would have been cool if he was to be the hero, oh no, we're being attacked. That would have been a cool scene, but there was cool music going on, dun.
Okay, amazing, and I know exactly what you're talking about. What I'm a little confused by in that scene, I would have thought, maybe incorrectly, that was a Timothy Dalton movie.
You have me questioning myself.
Because I think that's the one where the same movie, and I like Timothy Dalton, where he jumps, over the Death to Spies, and he squeezes the balloon and busts it.
That's since you brought that up. I know we're kind of jumping around, but that is my favorite Timothy Dalton scene. Again, a lot of it has to do with the music that's playing, but it shows he's he killed my friend, and he's going after him.
And I think he did a great job. And many people would say, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with him, that Timothy Dalton, his portrayal of James Bond was the closest to the literary James Bond that Ian Fleming wrote about. And Timothy Dalton's a great actor. And, I don't have any real complaints. The only complaint, it seemed like during the Timothy Dalton era, the world was kind of tired of James Bond. It just wasn't as exciting. It's just like, oh, another James Bond movie.
It's almost like it needed that gap between.
Yeah, because they're good movies.
Yeah, I like them. So I do have to jump in and say now I'm embarrassed because you were exactly right. The milkman was in Living Daylights, not A View to Kill. So sorry to Roger. Sorry to Timothy.
Roger, you're on that one either.
All right. Well, anyway,
Roger Moore. My criticism, Roger Moore. smoke cigars. James Bond doesn't smoke cigars.
Cigarettes, baby.
Yeah, cigarettes maybe. In fact, I'm sure Ian Fleming tells you the exact kind of cigarettes, and I'll bet James Bond has them custom made at some kind of
rolls
shop.
them himself, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, you know, everything. He has his shoes made by somebody and his suits made by somebody. James Bond lives, you know, the ultimate lifestyle, and probably that's because he's. Tomorrow I might be dead. As you know, it's terrible. I like him a lot. I always am forgetting his name.
Daniel Craig.
Daniel Craig. Thank you.
Yeah.
Said in his first movie, the life expectancy of a 00 is very short.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember exactly. It's something along the lines of, like you said, a 00's life expectancy is very.
It's not very long.
Is very so your mistake will be short lived because M was talking about maybe regretting recruiting him. Yeah. That was. I messed up that line, but that's an awesome line.
Yeah, and it's great, and I think that kind of gives some view towards why does James Bond live this life, you know, this extravagance life is the, you know, custom made. Well, you know, his life is on the line. What kind of life would you live if every day could be your last day? Maybe he's living it like every day is his last day.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
It's kind of cool.
It is cool. All right, so we talked about Roger. We talked about Timothy. Yeah, the only other thing to say about Timothy is, I do like those movies, both of his movies. A lot of people say it might have, like his was a more violent, serious Bond, and a lot of people say it was just too early, unfortunately. Like you said, given the time frame.
It's a huge change from Roger Moore, rope-a-dope, to this guy that's really dark and brooding and, you know, shit.
Yeah, I watched both of his movies recently too, and I like them. I mean, the only goofy thing that really stands out to me is sledding on a cello.
Yeah, Stradivarius.
Yeah,
cello.
But yeah,
and it has a name.
Well, I don't remember the name. I don't.
The Lady's Rose.
Yeah,
or something like that. I'm guessing. I don't know.
All right, so
Rose of a lady. Something about a rose and a lady. But anyhow, yeah, that was kind of dopey.
But no, he looks awesome. He's serious, and
I think he did a great job.
Yeah.
In fact, you know, there was a third movie for him written, was ready to go, and it's, as is typical in Hollywood, something got screwed up where they ran out of financing or the timing was right or something. But there was a third Timothy Dalton movie in the works before
cool.
they decided to
start from scratch a few years later
and reboot.
Yeah,
because I don't think they were doing that well. They just weren't big box office hits, and they thought, what do we need to do to, you know, revitalize this franchise?
And GoldenEye certainly did that.
That's
for sure. So that's actually a good segue into favorite James Bond movie. So I'll actually start on this one where I kind of mentioned it earlier. GoldenEye is my second favorite James Bond movie. I rewatched it recently, and I watched it with my wife, who had only seen the Daniel Craig movies. So we watched everything all backwards, where I believe No Time to Die was her first movie. So then so after that, of course, she was upset about the ending. So I said, okay, well, we have to watch Daniel Craig's movies. So we watched all of his movies. And she was, I like those movies. I just don't like how the series ended, or I don't like how his run ended in No Time to Die. And then I said, all right, well, let me show you my second favorite movie, GoldenEye. And we watched that, and she actually said that it felt a little bit dated, which sucks to hear because I guess it's nostalgic for me, so I don't really look at it as dated. But I guess if it's your first time seeing it is in 2022, I guess I could see that. I asked her like what it was specifically, and I don't know if it's, a lot of it has to do with like dealing with the GoldenEye satellite, and they're on like these big computer monitors, and Natalia works in a computer facility, and the monitors are the big box monitors. I don't know what it was specifically that made it feel dated, but I mean, it's all that's he's got an Omega on. I have nothing but good things to say about GoldenEye soundtrack. Pierce Brosnan's first outing.
I think GoldenEye's a great movie.
It really rocks. Good villain.
There's just so many just really classic James Bond scenes. Him jumping off that dam.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, God, that's got to be like in the top 5 all-time greatest James Bond stunts.
It's awesome.
And shortly after that, I mean, like within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, he's riding that damn motorcycle off the cliff, free flying into an airplane that's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just and rocking side. He's shooting the shit out of stuff and blowing stuff all to hell, and that's just in the opening scene.
Yeah, before the main theme.
He has that incredible tank chase through the Moscow or wherever the hell they're at.
I have a bunch
of... There's just all kind of stuff. That's just a crazy great movie.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. I have a bunch of awesome trivia about that movie too, but we'd be talking for a while if I brought up all the trivia. But yeah, it's awesome. So I'll loop from that to say, nostalgia, second favorite Bond movie, love it. Probably my favorite Brosnan movie, but my favorite movie, without a doubt, Daniel Craig, Casino Royale, which interestingly enough is the same director as GoldenEye. So he rebooted Bond twice. But yeah, with Craig and Casino Royale, there's something magical where I'm not like a big poker player, but I love poker movies and scenes. So you just sprinkle that into an already awesome Bond movie. And again, I could go on and on about the great things about Casino Royale.
Which is amazing because, that, although in the book in Casino Royale it wasn't poker, it was Chem de Fer or whatever the hell Bond plays. It's similar to blackjack, more so than poker. But Ian Fleming had a huge portion of his book written around this card game. And it was for the same objective, to defeat the chief.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, again, I could go on and on about the positives about Casino Royale. Why is it my favorite? I don't know. It's one of those movies that I could throw on or turn on at any point in the movie and just start watching it and be interested. So that's awesome.
I love Daniel Craig, and it's hard to say what my favorite Bond movie is because my favorites are around moments in the movies.
Yeah.
Like, I really like From Russia with Love, just the overall. And I think it's because that's the movie I saw that kind of awakened me to James Bond. That's where I saw his rifle that was in his suitcase that he took. I'd never seen a rifle that you assemble like that. And that's I actually have one because I do stuff like that. It's a Charter Arms AR-7, and it's the exact same. All the components are in the stock, and you take it apart and you assemble. And it's a little 22, long rifle, and there's nothing particularly special. It's called a survival rifle. You take it, you pack it in your bag, and if you need a rifle, it'll kind of do the job. It shoots a bullet and
hunt rodents.
But it isn't what I'd want to be using all the time as a defensive weapon. But then in Goldfinger, the laser scene with James Bond, the introduction of the Aston Martin DB5, the classic DB5 that that's probably as famous as James Bond himself. Thunderball, he's using the gadget, the backpack flying around. Casino Royale, I really, really like. Daniel Craig disappointed me in No Time to Die because he died. No other James Bond has died. Sean Connery never died. They just live on forever. And it's amazing. As much as I like James Bond, every James Bond movie I have, I've seen more than once. Never Say Die. I saw it one time. I saw it in the movie theater. I haven't watched it again. And I know there's parts of it that I really like. I like the car sequence. I like the fight as he's moving through. I don't like him dying. And I'm sure it impacts different people in different ways. Some people say it was a perfect close to the arc of Daniel Craig. You saw it, his very first assignment, and you saw his very final assignment. You know what? I don't want to see a final assignment. I kind of liked the way Skyfall ended, with him driving off in the Aston Martin with his wife, girlfriend, whatever, mother of his child, to retire forever in wherever, Jamaica, and just drink rum and.
Was that the end of Spectre?
Yeah, the end of Spectre, not Skyfall. Yeah, Skyfall was when what's her name died. Yeah, the end of Skyfall is. I could have seen that to be. I don't want to see ever an end to James Bond, but that could have been to me a fitting end. It just that's the end. He
drove off.
He's throw away his Walter. He's out of bullets. He's done. He's had it. Rather than dying in the line of duty, I just didn't like that.
Yeah. So that would be a good transition to what do you think is next? Do you think it's going to be another? When you say reboot, it's kind of weird. Like, is every new James Bond a reboot? I'd say not necessarily. In my eyes, I think what a reboot would be is just something completely different and new. So, like, I guess so this is kind of a good example. I would say Daniel Craig in Casino Royale is a reboot because it's like, we've never seen him be a fresh 00. I would say that's a reboot. But a good question is, was GoldenEye really a reboot because it just throws him into another mission?
I don't consider GoldenEye a reboot. Yeah. It was just a different actor and different maybe directors. And I think it was great. It was fresh. I could be wrong, and may be wrong, but I don't think we'll ever see the phenomena of Daniel Craig again. The way they did the reboot from very start, where he wasn't, he was just recently made a 00. He hadn't even achieved 2 kills yet. You saw first two kills, and he was technically made a 00 before he achieved both kills, which is kind of odd, because the guy that makes his second kill says, I think he says, in order to be a double kill, you need, or to be a 00, you need. And Bond says 2 kills. Well, that guy was his second kill. So was he not yet a 00? Maybe he wasn't. Yeah,
I don't think so. I think that's... And you actually explained that to me several years ago, where I didn't really understand the quip right there. But the guy says, needn't worry, your second kill is boom, and then Craig kills him right there. And I'm like, well, what was he going to say? Because Craig then says, yes, considerably. And I was like, what was he going to say? And you were like, well, easy, because you just shot him dead versus the bathroom brawl.
Yeah, easier
fighting for his life.
Yeah, he said the first one. How did he say? He didn't die well.
Yeah. So how did he die? Who? Your contact? Not well. Yeah, that's cool. So I think I agree with you. What's next for the franchise? I could easily see it being, here's your actor, here's Bond, movie starts, on a mission.
I think they have an opportunity. Whether or not they'll do it or not, I don't know. And here's what the opportunity is. I see the way No Time to Die ends as very similar to the way, and I'm not sure of the name of the book. It was I think it was the book before You Only Live Twice. And it wasn't on Her Majesty's Secret Service. So I'm kind of getting confused. But what I'm leading to is, in the book, at the end of the book, James Bond is supposedly killed. He's like missing in action. They don't know where he's at. There's a good chance he is dead. Well, the next book starts that he's discovered, he's been discovered by Russians, and he's been brainwashed, and he's sent to kill M. He's like you know, and they discover he's still alive, but he's been brainwashed. So I could, and it's kind of interesting because there are similarities. As we were seeing in the end of No Time to Die, there was it was either a Chinese fleet or a Russian fleet of ships closing in on that location, and they're the ones that actually sent the missiles to blow the shit out of it. I kind of think that there's a possibility it could follow that plot that James Bond didn't die, similar to what happened in the movie, I think it was Skyfall, where he was shot and fell off the train trestle down into the river, and you know, like they thought he was dead, but he showed up and he wasn't dead. Well, who's to say that when those bombs were exploding, one of the concussions of the bomb, rather than killing him, knocked him off the mountain and he fell down into the ocean, and the Navy, communist, whatever, the Russian Navy finds him. He's not quite dead, and he's not dead. The only thing that's kind of a problem with the whole thing of these nanobites that's in his blood system, that if it, as they say in the movie, you can't remove them. Well, if he can't remove them, he really can't come in contact with anyone who potentially could come in contact with his wife or his daughter, because the nanites would kill him.
Right.
So that makes that he almost has to become a rogue agent, act on his own, you know, act without ever making contact with someone who might contact his wife or his daughter, which would be M or Q, you know, or you know, maybe his wife just goes completely off the grid and say, you know, I'm done with this whole thing, and I'm gonna go live in Switzerland with my daughter, and there's no need for me to ever be in contact with any of them.
Yeah.
So I see it as I'm hoping it's a continuation rather than a reboot.
I gotcha.
And if it is, I'd end up watching No Time to Die, because he didn't really die.
Yeah. So I could see that. But I think I'm kind of on the opposite end, where I hope they don't do that, because I'm kind of in the camp where it's like, yeah, you know, Craig had his story. That's a nice little box set.
Yeah.
That's that. And I have no problem at all acknowledging or admitting to myself that, you know, in Craig's storyline, as sad as it is, he, you know, died in the end. And then if you were to start it up again, here's James Bond. It's a different James Bond. It's a different quote unquote universe. And he's doing his thing here. I'd have no problem saying, okay, this James Bond's not dead.
I'm sure the producers are going wild trying to figure out what's because I'm sure there's those two distinct camps. That one wants a continuation, that he hasn't died, and one wants a reboot.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you which one's going to win out.
Yeah, because typically, I feel like you know, almost all of Daniel's movies connect in some way. Typically, James Bond movies don't connect, and as far as I know, really the only one is in, was it in A Living Daylights, or maybe A License to Kill, where they reference that Bond had a wife that passed away. From Her Majesty's Secret Service, and that was like really the only connection that I can think of in previous Bond movies.
I agree. I think there's sort of a loose connection between the actors. You know, Q was Desmond, whatever his name was the same guy. I think he is an actor that has the distinction of portraying that character in more James Bond movies than anybody.
Yeah, I think so.
More than any actor. I mean, he was in kind of like all of them. I don't know if he was in Dr. No, but I'm pretty sure he was in
From Russia with Love.
From Russia with Love. And he certainly was in Goldfinger, and then from Goldfinger up until his last portrayal in one of the Pierce Brosnan movies.
Exactly, yeah. Cool. Well, we'll see. I'm excited. I don't think there's any point in trying to guess an actor because I'll be honest. If they just brought an actor out of nowhere that I've never heard of, if he does a good job, I'm cool with it. So I don't really have a preference on.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I'd almost like it to be an unknown person because I'm not real crazy about seeing Loki.
Yeah.
James Bond.
Yeah.
Because I'd say he's freaking Loki.
Right. All right, so we just kind of recapping. We talked about the first movie. We talked about a favorite. Like you said, you didn't really pick a favorite. You just kind of said you like moments in movies. But would you say, if you had to pick one, would you say from Russia with Love since it was among your first, or would you maybe pick a Craig movie?
I tell you what, Casino Royale is great, and it's my whole view of Daniel Craig is tarnished by his death.
I know I hate that you hate because one thing that I've told you before, but not for this little podcast is I told you that upon my second viewing of No Time to Die, I did enjoy it more, and that's because I had a feeling that he was going to die. So when we were watching it in the movie theater, it was almost like the whole movie I was just thinking, is he going to die here? Is he going to die here? And it was just like this weight was on me the whole movie. And so on the second viewing, when I know what's going to happen, I was like, okay, let me just sit and watch this and enjoy the movie like beat by beat instead of trying to anticipate what's coming forward. And when I watched it like that, I really enjoyed it. Like you said, that has awesome moments. Yeah. I actually watched just the Cuba scene with when he's in the tux, and that's just like top-notch Bond stuff between awesome action, little funny moments like taking a break in between the fight to take a shot with the girl, and then but right after that, so that's like a little goof, like let me take a shot, like are you really gonna do that in the middle of a gunfight? Like that's a little goof, but immediately after that it starts playing awesome Bond music, like dun 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 dun, and what's he do? He hops over the bar, grabs a gun, hops over the bar, and just get goosebumps like, this is Bond, baby. Like he was like, I'm gonna take this shot because I might walk out here and get shot in the head, kind of like you were saying earlier, but I'll take this shot and we're gonna try and go kick some butt, which he did.
Yeah, it's a great way. It's amazing how that little...
Just the ending, the last 10, 15 minutes.
And Einstein said it once very well when he was conducting a class. He was talking to college students about something, and he was doing a multiplication example. And he said, like, 1 times 10 is 10, 2 times 10 is 20, and he did it, and he got up to 9 times 10, and he said, instead of 90, he said 91. And everyone's like, oh, yeah. And he said, well, you're right, but the point I'm trying to make is I've done it 9 times, maybe 8 times, and they were all correct, and you didn't say anything at all. But I make one mistake, and that's all you focus on, that one mistake, when 8 times, 80% of the time I'm right. Mm-hmm. He said, you dwell on that one. And he said, that's what prevents people from being successful. They dwell on the failures rather than, he said, the only people that make mistakes are people that are trying. Mm-hmm. So, and the only people that have successes are people that are trying. Yeah. If you don't try, you won't have any failures, but you're not going to have any successes either. Yeah. So anyhow, that's what I viewed that whole Bond movie. Those final 10 minutes, final 5 minutes, just that's all I think of. Yeah. It's weird. Yeah. I mean, it's a weird thing because I absolutely acknowledge there are some great moments. Well, one of the moments I find a little bit hard to take is when he goes to the crypt that Vesper Lynd's in, and it blows up. Mm-hmm. I thought it killed him. Yeah. I mean, it blew the hell out of him. I thought, how the hell can you survive that? Yeah. A big fucking baboon. Yeah. And I thought, fuck, he killed him off pretty quickly. Right. Poor bastard.
Yeah, that was wild. Yeah. No burns on him whatsoever. Just a little bit of dirt.
He gets up and, damn
it. His ears ringing a little bit. That's it.
Holy shit.
So I guess the questions I have, and we can just kind of run through them. You mentioned I have here, hottest, coolest Bond girl. You mentioned what's her name, Ursula Anders, Doctor No.
Yeah, I tell you what, she's just etched. I mean, you look at her today. I mean, she looks like dog food. But of course, look at me. Shit, time is not our friend. But my God, she was so breathtaking. And keep in mind, when I saw her, I was probably 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing her coming up out of the water, it's like, is she God?
Yeah, right.
Or goddess? It was great. And, you know, like Vesper Lynn, I think she was a great actress, but I didn't see her as, oh man, she's really, really hot. In terms of hotness, Ursula Andress is the epitome of that for me in the Bond movies. And all the Bond girls are really beautiful women. Right? They're models and they're just beautiful. But Ursula Andress is the one that did it for me.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm glad that you have a solid pick because I've been trying to think. I was even the one who wrote these questions a few days ago, and I don't really have a number one, unfortunately. Whether it's hottest or coolest, because like you said, they're all pretty, and a lot of them do cool things. Some are more capable than others, as far as some are just kind of damsels in distress, and then others pick up a gun and kick butt too. So unfortunately I don't really have a number one answer, but it's kind of like that's just one of those like tropes, I guess. When you watch a Bond movie, there's going to be a cool babe in there.
Yeah.
So
I feel bad. A lot of them get killed. That bitch that got painted gold, and the one that got painted in oil. You really shouldn't hang around James. He's not the safest guy to be around.
Yeah. And then I guess we kind of did these questions out of order, but I guess it doesn't really matter. But another one I had was favorite Bond gadget. So we talked about the White Lotus. Of course, I always go back to thinking about my favorite Bond movies. So I think about GoldenEye, where he had his Omega. That was like the grapple gun. I think he... Yeah. Oh, no, he did use it twice. So he used the grapple gun to escape.
Yeah, when he was running through there.
So he did that. But then he also used it as a laser to break out of the train that was going to explode. Yeah. And didn't he use it to blow... No, I thought he used it in some fashion on the remote mines. In the very end, he places the remote mines, and I feel like he activates the remote mine. He does. So he activates the remote mines with his Omega, but then 006 disables it because they have that cool conversation of like, oh, you have a newer model. And then he knows to disable the bombs. He's like, press here, do I? And he disables it. But what ultimately blows it up is the exploding pen that he hits out of Boris's hand. That was cool. That's cool. So anyway, that's me just rattling off a few gadgets. What about you? You mentioned the cool gun and From Russia with Love.
I would say the coolest gadget he has, Aston Martin DB5.
Yeah.
When I first saw that in GoldenEye, it was like, holy shit. And at the time I saw that, I recall, again, I was a kid. I was like, 14 years old, 13 years old. I was fixated on some cars. And, at the time, I didn't know a lot about cars. You're not driving, you're just riding. You're a kid going with your parents or going to the grocery store and that kind of. But I was seeing movies, and at that time, Batmobile was on, which was cool. Batteries to power, turbines to speed. And I thought, beats the hell out of our Ford Fairlane. Look at that fucking thing. And there was multiple cars. There was a series called the Green Hornet, which had Bruce Lee in it as the sidekick, and the Green Hornet was a guy, which I don't remember much, but they had a car called the Black Beauty. And it had all kind of shit inside, clicking smoke screens and all this shit. The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was playing. The Man from U.N.C.L.E. had a cool car. And so here's this here comes the Aston Martin DB5, and it's like the ultimate. Say, look at all the shit this thing's got, a fucking ejector seat.
Mm-hmm.
It was just so cool. I mean, in terms of the impact, the surprise, and just like awe, shock and awe. Nothing that Bond had. The Amiga's cool. I like it. I have an Amiga, but the shock and awe of seeing is going, holy shit, that's cool.
Yeah.
It has to be the Aston Martin DB5. Even the subsequent Aston Martins, they're cars that are, not faster, nicer, sleeker, modern.
Mm-hmm.
The DB5 is the one that made the biggest impression on me.
Yeah, and it's stuck around pretty much as long as the PPK, and you could argue the same thing for the PPK. There's lighter guns, thinner guns, bigger caliber pistols,
Yeah.
But it's just like, it's pretty iconic, just like the DB5, where even Daniel Craig is using the freaking PPK and the DB5, and it's like, man.
Yeah, I mean, Walters even come out with the whatever it is, the P9 or PK or whatever it is, the larger, and Brosnan actually used it.
Yeah, the P99. Yeah.
P99, but the PPK it just defines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I guess we're pretty much done. Just one last thing I want to throw out there is I feel like we'd kind of be mean not to mention On Her Majesty's Secret Service and George Lazenby, where it's
Poor George.
Yeah, poor George. Only one movie. I don't have any.
You know what? George says he scored a lot of pussy. He did. He said, I did like 3 times a day. He said, I couldn't do any more movies because I was physically incapacitated.
Yeah.
I think he has an amazing story. He was just like a model.
Yeah.
And he just bullshitted his way into the James Bond role.
Yeah,
And he said, I really wasn't an actor. I was a model.
Yeah.
I really didn't have... But he said, my acting experience was in some advertisements I'd done in Australia on, for TV. And here I am, on the silver screen, for God's sake, and doing James Bond. What an incredible... And I think he's the one that denied doing any more. I think he just said,
I'm good.
Yeah, that's not among my the thing I like most about them is the soundtrack. The sound, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the song, the instrumental. It wasn't among my favorite movies. There was weird things because he met Blofeld. Well, he'd already met Blofeld in Live and Let Die, and it was like Blofeld didn't recognize him, and I thought, how the hell could he not recognize him? I mean, he met him at Live and Let Die.
You mean Thunderball?
No, Live and Let Die.
What?
Thunderball, he did not meet Blofeld. In Live and Let Die, that was in the crater in Japan, the spaceship station, and the ninjas.
Live and Let Die is Roger, right?
No, Live and Let Die is Sean Connery.
The Live and Let Die. Boom.
Sean Connery, absolutely, I'm certain. And the beginning of it, the reason it's called Live and Let Die, in the beginning of it, Sean Connery is killed.
You only live twice?
I'm sorry, you're right. It's You Only Live Twice. Live and Let Die is Roger Moore, and I'm confusing the titles. And you're right. It's not Live and Let Die. It's You Only Live Twice, and that's where Sean Connery gets killed in the beginning, and he sees Blofeld because Live and Let Die was the movie before On Her Majesty's Secret Service, I think.
Yeah, so I think it's going Thunderball, then You Only Live Twice, where I guess that's where he meets him, and that's where you'd be more knowledgeable on. And then, yes, he's in On Her Majesty's Secret Service after that.
And that's why I thought Blofeld and Bond met face to face, because up until then they'd never met. He didn't know what he looked like. They met face to face in You Only Live Twice. And then here's Majesty's Secret Service, and they're meeting face to face, Telly Savalas and Dingleberry, and they don't recognize each other. And I'm going, how could they not recognize each other? So there was a continuity problem I had with it, and you know, in that he got married to whatever Emma Peel. That and I just didn't see her as being all that great anyhow. I wouldn't have married her. But, and then he cried at the end. He boo-hoo-hooed over her, and I just wasn't impressed.
Yeah.
So he's another has-been.
Yeah. Well, I want to give him some recognition because we kind of touched everyone else. So.
I think it would have been better if Sean Connery were in it than him. But you know.
Connery was over it at that point, but then he came back.
Well, yeah, when he came back in Diamonds Are Forever, I thought I'd rather have Lazenby.
Yeah.
Sean Connery was so old looking, and he's with those two dopey ass villains, the ones with the hair and they're like openly gay, and they're just it's crazy as shit.
Yeah, that's one of my probably my least favorite.
It is my least Sean Connery. That's it was awful. You know, it's just awful. What a terrible movie.
Cool. All right. Well, I guess that's it. Any other James Bond thing you can think of to throw out there before we cut it off?
We covered a lot of ground.
Cool.
Daniel Craig, great actor. I mean, boy, and I think he took a great interest and personal role in the direction of the films, more so than I would think any of the other actors did. So he did a great job, phenomenal job. I'm not sure we'll see. It'll be curious to see what happens in the next installment, when it happens, and what do they do with it. Because initially Daniel Craig was facing a lot of criticism. He was like, they called him blonde. You know, I don't know if I'd call him blonde, but he certainly isn't the dark hair that we're used to seeing. And he just was. It wasn't very long into Casino Royale where I was saying, this guy's fucking great.
Yeah. No, he was awesome. I'm excited to see what's next. It's cool they can keep the franchise going with. Yeah, as long as they just don't make just a complete shit box of a movie, which I think would be kind of hard to do. You'd have to make one not caring, and I think that franchise has enough people caring where they take the time.
I sure think so. It's still sort of a family enterprise. You know, Barbara, whatever her name is,
Broccoli.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think she has a lot to say and do, and a lot of interest in the franchise.
Cool.
Okay, great. This has been a good experience. I had fun.
Thank you. All right.
Hello to people that I'm sure if you're seeing me, you'll be alive, but who knows? I'll do more than 10. Tell your friends. Click subscribe and comment below.
Yeah,
can you put one of those little things?
I can, but I'm probably won't do
Do
it.
it. I don't have my own channel. I'm not that interesting.
That's it.